Hey guys, and welcome back to week 2 of our series on Encounters with Resurrection. And during this series, we have been looking at some of the stories of people who have encountered Jesus and after his resurrection, and what it means for them and what it means for us today. And it's important that as followers of Jesus, we understand that his death and resurrection meant something, not just 2,000 years ago, but it also still means something for us today. If you were with us last week, we talked about Thomas and doubting Thomas, and how even though he spent years with Jesus, he still struggled with his doubt whenever Jesus was raised from the dead. When Jesus came back to meet the disciples before ascending up to heaven, he went to Thomas and told Thomas to go ahead and touch the holes in his hands and his side and see that this Jesus was really telling the truth and that it was really him. And you see, Jesus wasn't really scared of Thomas's doubt. And for us today, that gives us a lot of hope, because even today, God's not scared of your doubt. And it's a natural thing to have doubts about God sometimes. But the key is that Thomas stayed in his group of community. He walked those doubts out with the people around him. And he didn't allow his doubts to become the sole focus of his attention. He acknowledged his doubts. He stayed with the other disciples. And he waited for Jesus to come and be in a position to meet his doubts and to answer his doubts. This week I want to move forward, and I want to start our exploration with someone who makes me feel a lot better about myself as a Christian and as a follower of Jesus. Now, Peter was one of Jesus' disciples, and it's kind of a big deal that throughout the early church that what Peter did. So Peter helped plant the early church. He helped spread the early days of Christianity. He was one of Jesus' really close disciples. But however, to really appreciate the impact of Jesus' resurrection on Peter and what it meant for Peter, we really need to take a look at the buildup, or the things that led to that encounter. And now, Peter was one of Jesus' best friends. He was in the inner circle, and he spent a lot of time with Jesus. He was kind of there for all the big events, even the ones that some of the other disciples missed out on. Peter was there. Think about your groups of friends. You have like this group of acquaintances, then you have your friends, your close friends, and then you have your inner circle, like your best friends, right? Well, Peter, James, and John were kind of this inner circle of Jesus. These three guys were the three that Jesus was closest with. Peter was also the guy that when Jesus asked the disciples, hey, who do people say that I am? Who do you guys think, what do you guys really think about me? Peter's the one who spoke up and said, you're Jesus, Son of the living God. And Jesus gave him the name Peter, or Rock. The thing that's ironic about that is there's not a whole lot about Peter that was sturdy or stable like a rock. In fact, Peter's the one that later on Jesus tells, hey, get behind me, Satan. That's some friend, right? And so throughout the New Testament, as we get a look at Peter's life and a snapshot of Peter's life and some of the events that happened to him, what I love about him is that his journey as a follower of Jesus were marked by a series of ups and downs, highs and lows. There were times when he was just completely on top of his faith, ready to take on anything, and other times he just struggled mightily to live out his faith and figure out who he was and what he believed. Sometimes, even within a couple different moments, we had a high and a low just within a short time frame. Like the time he walked on water, he was having this great faith moment, walking on water, and then all of a sudden he's sinking and doubt and worrying. That sometimes that can sound familiar for a lot of us, right? We have these great moments, then we have these really low moments. So fast forward to the last days of Jesus, and the disciples are sitting around having a final meal with Jesus, and Judas is getting ready to betray Jesus, and we're really rushing towards this moment on the cross with Jesus, right? And during this meal, Jesus tells the disciples that some of them that are going to fall away. And Peter's the guy that gets mad about this. He's like, man, I would never do that. I would never do such a thing. I mean, how could I do such a thing? I just spent the last 3 years of my life dedicated to following you and going everywhere you go. But Jesus looks at Peter and says, not only are you going to fall away, but before the rooster crows 3 times, you're going to deny me 3 different occasions. And sure enough, as the events of the coming day unfold, Jesus is arrested, and Peter on 3 different occasions denies his involvement with Jesus. People are coming up to him like, hey, aren't you that guy that was with Jesus? He's like, nope, not me. That must be a different guy. And I relate a lot to Peter. I think sometimes we get so caught up in these snapshot stories that we fail to see the whole picture of what's really going on. And Peter is a man of really great conviction. He believed what he was following. He believed what he was doing it. But like a lot of us, Peter also got quite caught up in all the emotion. And he had all these high extremes and these low extremes. And even though he spent like these 3 years with Jesus, there's a lot of unknowns happening, especially at this moment after Jesus is arrested. There's a lot of unknowns of what's really going to happen. And sometimes I think we hear the story of Peter denying Jesus and we wonder, how could he do such a thing? How could he really deny Jesus? Who would do that? I would never do such a thing like that. But I want you to think about this for a second. Imagine you had just given your life to something for the last 3 years, every waking moment. You're committed to following Jesus and being with him. You're always with him. 3 years, you're with Jesus. That would be pretty cool, right? Now imagine this Jesus that you had committed yourself to for the last 3 years of following had been arrested. I mean, really think about that. These guys had hedged all of their bets on Jesus. They had committed to following him, and many were expecting some sort of reward for their time or service. They were expecting Jesus to set up this kingdom, and we're going to have these positions of power and authority, and this is going to be awesome. And then all that is gone. They were expecting Jesus to change the whole landscape of government, and then all of a sudden he's arrested. All hope seemed lost. And then for Peter, imagine the shame, the embarrassment, the despair that he was going through. He had just failed the one person that he had committed his life to. I mean, there was a lot of emotion going on here for Peter. But I want to fast forward, and as we look to Jesus' resurrection in the book of Mark, Mary and Salome these 3 women are going to the tomb to anoint Jesus' body. And as they get there, an angel appears to them and tells them that Jesus is risen from the dead, and they say this, "Go and tell the disciples and Peter that Jesus is going to show up in Galilee." I mean, think about that for a second. Imagine that you're Peter, and these ladies show up and tell you what the angel had told them. Go tell the disciples and Peter that I'm going to come meet them. Now, how many of you guys have ever had a friend that you've done something to hurt their feelings, or something that you did backfired, or you told a secret you weren't supposed to tell and they found out that you told? And then the next time you see that friend, things were a little weird or awkward, right? You weren't quite really sure how to act around them. You weren't really sure what your friendships, are they going to be mad? Are they not going to be mad? What do they know? What do they not know? And I imagine this is what it was like for Peter. He may have doubts where his relationship with Jesus stood. The embarrassment and the shame probably impacted him in like a real significant way. But Jesus comes back, and the first person the angel calls by name says, "Go tell the disciples and Peter, I'm coming for him." That's pretty significant. So later on in Galilee, in the book of John, we find Jesus showing up to the disciples, and the disciples are all on this boat, and Jesus shows up, and Peter jumps out of the boat, and he goes running to Jesus. And a very interesting exchange begins to happen between Jesus and Peter. After sitting on the shore of the sea, they're eating fish and having breakfast, and Jesus looks at Peter, and 3 different times he says, "Hey, do you really love me?" And there are a lot of debates about why Jesus asked him 3 times, but I can't help but imagine that it's much like the angel telling Mary and the women at the tomb, "Go tell Peter that I'm coming." This is this moment of redemption for Peter. You see, the thing about this is Jesus is not scared of our mistakes. Just like he's not afraid of our doubt, he doesn't define us by our weaknesses and our worst moments, but chooses to define us by his love and his resurrection. Think about it this way. With Peter, Jesus knew he would deny him 3 times. He knew that it was going to happen, and yet he made Peter part of his inner circle. When he came back and he rose from the dead, he rose so that Peter would not be defined by his worst moments, but that Peter would be defined by God's victory on the cross. The whole message of the cross is that in Jesus' resurrection, we have forgiveness available to us in our weakest moments. In our moments of greatest failure, we don't have to worry about where we stand with God, because he still calls us by name, and he still gives us a chance to redeem our weakest moments. For some of you, there might be some failures that you're letting define your relationship with God. Maybe it's a mistake you made, and you're just not sure what that means for your relationship with God. Today, God is calling you by name and saying that he defeated death and the grave, and that you're not defined by that mistake. You're defined by his victory on the cross. Thanks for joining us, guys. We'll see you next week.